So I don't know about y'all, but my phone has a ton of notifications on it. So every day I will get notifications about various texts, I will get sports updates, and of course I will get numerous news updates, some of which are extremely upsetting and disappointing, and some of which seem to be, at least this week, about deaths of celebrities. And I was definitely saddened to see the news of the death of one of our cultural icons, albeit one of the more controversial ones, in the death of Terry Bollea. Now you might be wondering, who is Terry Bollea? But you definitely know him by his stage name, Hulk Hogan. I will readily admit, I was a wrestling fan in my younger years growing up in Houston. I remember cheering on Hulk Hogan from the comfort of my living room. I remember watching him and Randy Macho Man Savage, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Jake the Snake Roberts, the Ultimate Warrior, and of course the late great Andre the Giant. I remember one of the most iconic moments when Hulk Hogan body slammed Andre the Giant. No small feat, as he must have weighed close to 500 pounds at the time. It was so thrilling and so exciting to see such incredible matches. It was only later on, when I began to read the writings of the late Houston Chronicle columnist and humorist Ken Hoffman, who died last year, that I began to develop a greater understanding of WWF wrestling. For you see, every time there was a match in Houston, Ken would write about the wrestlers in the match and who won each match. Oh, did I mention this article would come out the day before? It was then that I began to learn and understand wrestling was less a sport and more a form of entertainment. That was when I began to understand that in wrestling, there are heroes and there are villains who help shape the popularity and interest in it. It is not that these were not incredible athletes doing amazing acts. It is just that they were in the business of making us cheer and boo and continue to be engaged. Hulk Hogan perhaps understood this better than anyone. He loved the theater of wrestling, and he understood that when his popularity was waning, how to recreate himself not as a hero, but as a villain, or as a heel in wrestling parlance. Swapping out his trademark yellow for black, Hogan took on a new persona that would dominate much of the rest of his career, including a very famous bout with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Now, this is not to praise Hogan, as he leaves behind a very complicated and messy legacy, but instead, I wanted to focus on the societal need, especially when it comes to storytelling, for us to have a hero and to have a villain. Over and over again, whether it is in Lord of the Rings, Disney, Harry Potter, Star Wars, our own tradition, and even in traditions like Christianity, there is a compulsive need to have a villain. As an aside, as we were talking about in my History of Anti-Semitism class, all too often in real life, Jews are portrayed in any number of ways as the villain. That is in part why anti-Semitism is so persistent, because we can easily serve as the villain the world needs. But that is a very depressing conversation for another day. In this week's double portion of Matot Maseh, which are the last two portions before we get to Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, God instructs Moses that he is to assign 6 cities of refuge. These refuges are designated for a rotseach, for a killer. But what are we supposed to do with this information? According to Rabbi Artson in his book, The Bedside Torah, the Torah asserts emphatically that the 6 cities of refuge would only protect the unintentional manslayer. The willful murdered was to be evicted, tried, and punished. No matter how powerful the divinity whose altar provides shelter, the Torah mandates that a religion cannot interpose itself between a murderer and justice. Or to put it another way, Intention matters, including when related to issues of crime and punishment. Of course, can any of us truly know the intent of another human being? But we'll get back to this. Now, getting back to villains. It is all too common that we need to have a villain to raise our interest or our investment in a story. For example, since I've moved here to your beloved Nebraska, I know some of your greatest rivals, at least for college football fans, are schools like Iowa and Minnesota. Though I know Ohio State, the Ohio State, and Michigan are up there too. And many of you have been so kind in reminding me that though we don't play each other anymore, there is still a special place in your heart for my beloved Longhorns. And to borrow another sports analogy, don't get me started on how many fans now live to hate my Astros. Rivalries can be fun. But hating other fans or viewing them or opposing players as evil, this can lead to threats and violence. Even in the world of sports and entertainment, once we villainize someone, it is easy to justify doing all sorts of horrible things to them. So it is no surprise that in so many of our dialogues and conversations, especially but not exclusively to topics related to anything political, and especially to Israel, there are concrete perspectives that one side is the hero and the other side is the villain. Unfortunately, with this line of thinking, it becomes very difficult to be in dialogue or relationship when your side is right and the other side is wrong. Or even worse, when your side is the side of righteousness and the other side is the side of villainy. Now, this is not to diminish the suffering, especially the suffering of innocence, nor is it to diminish the role of bad faith actors. Tonight's sermon instead is just a reflection on how we are all conversing about each other, but not to each other. When it comes to the cities of refuge, nowhere in the Torah does it say, especially when related to the cities of refuge, that the death of a person is a good outcome. Instead, the subtext is that they were trying to prevent a clan war, that if someone died by accident, the acts of retribution and violence could increase dramatically as a result. Or as the Torah is saying, intentions matter, outcomes matter, and having a little grace for those with whom you may disagree could be a pathway forward toward peace. I mention all of this because there have been a series of subreddit posts specifically about Temple Israel and about Tri-Faith. I am not going to dignify those posts here tonight, except to say they are extreme and incredibly accusatory. When I read the most recent one, I could not help but think of the House Un-American Activities Committee that operated during the 1950s and was determined to out everyone who's not only a communist, but may have had communist sympathies and thereby guilty by association. And if these same people happen to be affiliated with your organization was suspect as well. Guilt by association. Hundreds of people were blacklisted and lost their livelihood because they may have said or worked with one individual or group at a time. By the way, many of those accused were Jews. If you want a recent example of this, just watch or rewatch the movie Oppenheimer. With regards to what transpired here, is that I can tell you what has not happened. Is that those individuals involved in these posts never once reached out to me to hear my explanation for events. They just made assumptions and accusations with no interest in pursuing the truth. Just a story that they had already supported, the narrative they had already created. One with definite villains. Thankfully, some of you have reached out, and we've been able to talk. so I can provide thoughts and perspectives on what actually happened versus what allegedly happened. Now, I know I'm being a bit obtuse, and if you aren't following these, be grateful that it hasn't impacted you, because I have lost hours of sleep and hours of time. All of this has given me a new perspective on the Lashon Hara, literally evil speech or gossip, and why it is so hard. Or to use a quote I saw recently, people will question all the good things they hear about you, but believe the bad without a second thought. But regardless, this gossip is a symptom of a wider issue plaguing our community and the country at large, which is the silos of beliefs and circular conversations. By making the villain out of someone you disagree with, it removes any and all possibility of understanding, intent, or for compassion. What we cannot do is villainize each other, especially if we do have the best intentions to advocate and support innocent people who are suffering. That we may disagree on methods and priorities does not mean ill intent. There is a lot of room for compassion and concern. It is just in today's world, far too often, we are told that we have to make a choice and pick a side, as there is only one hero and only one villain. And that is where the conundrum lies. There are many tragedies in the wrestling world, from permanent injuries to steroid abuse and other forms of drug and alcohol abuse, from spousal and child abuse, and the list goes on and on. In the pursuit of popularizing heroes and villains, many who made the choice to portray them, it often cut their lives short. Such narratives for the sake of fiction can be a lot of fun. Such narratives in the real world can have much more devastating consequences. Let's try not to villainize each other and assume the worst of intentions, at least until we have a chance to really talk to one another. There is much to learn, and we may find some common ground. And we might just be able to learn a thing or two about each other's perspectives. Friends, I know this is not easy to do, and it is not popular to do. But enough with the armchair moralizing. It is time to get out into the real world and have hard conversations. The world is complicated and messy. Thoughts, ideas, and opinions about Israel, Gaza, Palestinians, and wars halfway across the world always continue to threaten to tear our communities apart. Not the opinions themselves, mind you, but the moral certainty behind them. For it is moral certainty that creates heroes and villains. And I encourage us not to be in that business, but instead in the business we have argued from this pulpit time and again, to lead with curiosity. Shabbat Shalom.